Solomon also built a palace for himself, and it took him 13 years to complete the construction. One of Solomon's buildings was called the Palace of the Forest of Lebanon. It was 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. It's talking about this taking 13 years to complete the construction, which, I mean, it took 7.5 for the temple. This takes almost twice as long, but with how much bigger it is, I mean, yeah. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alright, so we are looking at 1 Kings chapter 7. Previously, at least within 1 Kings, Solomon has been established as the new king after David. He has built a grand temple to God, which is kind of going to be like a replacement, more permanent version of what the tabernacle was, but also have some different construction and whatnot. Anyway, so they built that. That took like 7.5 years. And now we get to more building stuff, it seems. So, here we go, 1 Kings chapter 7. Solomon also built a palace for himself, and it took him 13 years to complete the construction. One of Solomon's buildings was called the Palace of the Forest of Lebanon. It was 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. There were 4 rows of cedar pillars, and great cedar beams rested on the pillars. The hall had a cedar roof. Above the beams on the pillars were 45 side rooms, arranged in 3 tiers of 15 each. On each end of the long hall were 3 rows of windows facing each other. All the doorways and doorposts had rectangular frames and were arranged in sets of 3 facing each other. Okay, so, couple of things I will note. This building is quite a bit bigger than the temple was, because the temple was 90 feet long, and then I think it said 30 feet wide and 15 feet high, or maybe it was also 30 feet high. You know what, we could go back and look at that real quick. Oh no, 45 feet high. So, the height was the same, but it was still like, I don't know, about 1.5 times as long and 2.5 times as wide. So yeah, like, we're talking a building that's almost, what, 6 times as large, maybe more like 5 times as large as the temple, and this is Solomon's palace that he builds for himself. That note there is probably just going to give the Hebrew cubit measurements and such. Now it mentions the hall had a cedar roof. Above the beams on the pillars were 45 side rooms. Or 45 rafters, or beams, or pillars. Architectural details in 7:2-6 can be interpreted in many different ways. Okay. So yeah, that is... quite a bit of room for leeway in what it might actually be like. Now, I'm like, the word rooms, I don't know how much sense that makes, because then you got, I mean, even if it's going along the length, you got 45, you got a grand total, I mean, okay, 10 feet each for the length, I guess, wouldn't be too ridiculous, but still. Anyway, it's big, very, very big palace. with a whole lot of rooms, or room for various things, it seems. Doorways and doorposts. Rigged version reads windows. Had rectangular frames and were arranged in sets of 3 facing each other. That might make a little more sense for windows rather than doors. But I don't know. Big building, lots of stuff going on here with it, but let me read through the rest of the description of it and what it says here before I get to saying too much more. Also, this chapter's kind of on the long side, so I want to keep it moving. Verse 6. Solomon also built the Hall of Pillars, which was 75 feet long and 45 feet wide. There was a porch in front, along with a canopy supported by pillars. Solomon also built the throne room, known as the Hall of Justice, where he sat to hear legal matters. It was paneled with cedar from floor to ceiling. Solomon's living quarters surrounded a courtyard behind this hall, and they were constructed the same way. He also built similar living quarters for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had married. From foundation to eaves, all these buildings were built from huge blocks of high-quality stone, cut with saws and trimmed to exact measure on all sides. Some of the huge foundation stones were 15 feet long, and some were 12 feet long. The blocks of high-quality stone used in the walls were also cut to measure, and cedar beams were also used. The walls of the great courtyard were built so that there was one layer of cedar beams between every 3 layers of finished stone, just like the walls of the inner courtyard of the Lord's temple with its entry room. Okay, real quick, I actually wanted to back up a little bit because I just remembered. It's talking about this taking 13 years to complete the construction, which, I mean, it took 7.5 for the temple. This takes almost twice as long. But with how much bigger it is, I mean, yeah. So is this Hall of Pillars supposed to be part of the... I guess these are different sections of the overall palace that Solomon built. Just the Palace of the Forest of Lebanon on its own was 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. But also, there was this Hall of Pillars that was 75 feet long, 45 feet wide, presumably also 45 feet high. I mean, if it was part of the same overall structure, same overall palace facility for Solomon, it would make sense. And that just gives the Hebrew measurements. Then it talks about the throne room known as the Hall of Justice. So the Syriac version and Latin Vulgate say that it was paneled with cedar from floor to ceiling. Hebrew reads from floor to floor. Which, I mean, like, if there were multiple... Well, I'm not sure if they used the word floor in that same way back then. I was going to say, if there were multiple, like, stories of the building, that could be read as just saying, like, from one floor to the next floor, it was all cedar. Which would then mean the same thing as saying from floor to ceiling, essentially. So, maybe that's what it meant. It's either way. Lots of cedar involved. And then it gets into the stone that was used, which I'm assuming all of these supplies were gathered from the same places that they got them for the temple. Because why not? Like, while you're building big stuff and getting supplies from these places, why not just keep it rolling? So, That would mean the stones were coming from the same quarry. The cedars were still coming from Lebanon / Tyre, although I guess Tyre was part of Lebanon. But anyway, and then we get some more measurements and stuff here. And that's just talking about how big some of the foundation stones were, which, I mean, that's some pretty big stone. But you needed that to keep it stable. Especially back in those days. Okay. Oh, and it mentions there was cedar, like, layered in, I guess, with some of the stone. But anyway, I guess we'll move along to verse 13 here after I get a quick sip of water. Okay, verse 13. King Solomon then asked for a man named Huram to come from Tyre. He was half Israelite, since his mother was a widow from the tribe of Naphtali, and his father had been a craftsman in bronze from Tyre. Huram was extremely skillful and talented in any work in bronze, and he came to do all the metal work for King Solomon. Huram cast 2 bronze pillars, each 27 feet tall and 18 feet in circumference. For the tops of the pillars he cast bronze capitals, each 7.5 feet tall. Each capital was decorated with 7 sets of lattice work and interwoven chains. He also encircled the lattice work with 2 rows of pomegranates to decorate the capitals over the pillars. The capitals on the columns inside the entry room were shaped like water lilies, and they were 6 feet tall. The capitals on the 2 pillars had 200 pomegranates in 2 rows around them, beside the rounded surface next to the lattice work. Huram set the pillars at the entrance of the temple, one toward the south and one toward the north. He named the one on the south side Jachin, and the one on the north Boaz. The capitals on the pillars were shaped like water lilies, and so the work on the pillars was finished. And so, I mean, given the section title, it says this is for the temple, not the palace. So, might have been multiple building projects going on simultaneously at this point. Kind of more detailed stuff for the temple, while, like, the main setup of Solomon's palace was also being established. Note there at Huram, Hebrew says Hiram. This is not the same person mentioned in 5:1. Yeah, no. This is not the king of Tyre we're talking about. Spelling might be a little bit off, but like ancient Hebrew, I know I've probably said this a bunch of times. Ancient Hebrew like didn't even have vowels, so it's slight differences there is understandable. That's given the Hebrew measurements. Also, I find it interesting it mentions the circumference of the pillars. Like, why wouldn't it mention, say, the diameter instead? I guess because it came out to a more even measurement with the circumference. There's a slight chance it was also, like, kind of hollow or whatever. Although, pillars being hollow, I don't know if that's a great idea, so maybe not. So yeah, I'm assuming these pillars that it talks about were like were part of the temple design. But I don't know if it ever really specifies, in here at least, which building that these pillars are for. Capitals on the column, shaped like water lilies, 6 feet tall, lots of pomegranates, which, if I remember right, pomegranates were part of, like, the tabernacle design and or the priestly vestments and whatnot, like the clothes that they wore. Oh, wait. Set the pillars at the entrance of the temple. Okay. That clarifies it for sure now. Note there where it says Boaz. Jacob probably means he establishes. Boaz probably means in him is strength. So I'm trying to think I'm not sure if there's significance to the names being associated with the different directions. But, you know, in some way probably meant to be reminders at least of God's strength and provision and the different things that he's done for Israel over the years. Anyway, I've still got quite a ways to go, so let's keep rolling. Verse 23. Then Huram cast a great round basin, 15 feet across from rim to rim, called the Sea. It was 7.5 feet deep and about 45 feet in circumference. It was encircled just below its rim by 2 rows of decorative gourds. There were about 6 gourds per foot all the way around, and they were cast as part of the basin. The sea was placed on a base of 12 bronze oxen, all facing outward. 3 faced north, 3 faced west, 3 faced south, and 3 faced east. And the sea rested on them. The walls of the sea were about 3 inches thick, and its rim flared out like a cup and resembled a water lily blossom. It could hold about 11,000 gallons of water. Okay, calling it the sea seems a little more appropriate there, if it was that large. Okay, that's just a measurement note. 12 bronze oxen. Hebrew says 12 oxen. Compare 2 Kings 18:17, which specifies bronze oxen. But I mean, if Huram was making this, it said earlier that he was working with bronze, so it stands to reason that they would have been bronze oxen. Okay. And you got these oxen facing all the different directions, serving as the support, I guess, for the basin that was called the sea. The walls were about 3 inches thick. Hebrew says a handbreadth. And 11,000 gallons. Hebrew says 2,000 baths. It's still fairly large stuff. Especially for being made out of bronze. Like, geez. Anyway, verse 27. Huram also made 10 bronze water carts, each 6 feet long, 6 feet wide, and 4.5 feet tall. They were constructed with side panels braced with crossbars. Both the panels and the crossbars were decorated with carved lions, oxen, and cherubim. Above and below the lions and oxen were wreath decorations. Each of these carts had 4 bronze wheels and bronze axles. There were supporting posts for the bronze basins at the corners of the carts. These supports were decorated on each side with carvings of wreaths. The top of each cart had a rounded frame for the basin. It projected 1.5 feet above the cart's top like a round pedestal, and its opening was 2.25 feet across. It was decorated on the outside with carvings of wreaths. Lots of wreaths. Anyway, the panels of the carts were square, not round. Under the panels were 4 wheels that were connected to axles that had been cast as one unit with the cart. The wheels were 2.25 feet in diameter and were similar to chariot wheels. The axles, spokes, rims, and hubs were all cast from molten bronze. Okay. I'd be interested as to what the purpose of all this was. Like, was it really just like pure decoration, or was there something else that this was all resembling? I mean, some of this stuff could harken back to crossing the Red Sea or the Jordan or a whole bunch of other things like that. A lot of these notes here are just giving the Hebrew units for the measurements. And it said there were 10 of these water carts. And I'm like, okay, why 10? Like, I'd like to think there's some specific significance to this stuff. I just don't know what it is offhand. But all this stuff made out of bronze. On to verse 34. There were handles at each of the 4 corners of the carts, and these 2 were cast as one unit with the cart. Around the top of each cart was a rim 9 inches wide. The corner supports and side panels were cast as one unit with the cart. Carvings of cherubim, lions, and palm trees decorated the panels and corner supports wherever there was room, and there were wreaths all around. All 10 water carts were the same size and were made alike, for each was cast from the same mold. Okay, that would make better sense of how they could wind up being so uniform, but also being one unit with all these different pieces to it. If they made a mold of it, then yeah, okay. Alright, Hebrew says half a cubit wide instead of 9 inches. Okay, verse 38. Huram also made 10 smaller bronze basins, one for each cart. Each basin was 6 feet across and could hold 220 gallons of water. He set 5 water carts on the south side of the temple and 5 on the north side. The great bronze basin, called the Sea, was placed near the southeast corner of the temple. He also made the necessary wash basins, shovels, and bowls. So at last Huram completed everything King Solomon had assigned him to make for the temple of the Lord. The 2 pillars, the 2 bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars, the 2 networks of interwoven chains that decorated the capitals, the 400 pomegranates that hung from the chains on the capitals, 2 rows of pomegranates for each of the chain networks that decorated the capitals on top of the pillars, the 10 water carts holding the 10 basins, the sea and the 12 oxen under it, the ash buckets, the shovels, and the bowls. Huram made all these things of burnished bronze for the temple of the Lord, just as King Solomon had directed. The king had them cast in clay molds in the Jordan Valley between Succoth and Zarethan. Solomon did not weigh all these things because there were so many. The weight of the bronze could not be measured. So, now I guess some of these basins and things like that could have been used by the priests to, like, wash their implements or wash themselves or whatever to, you know, help with being ceremonially clean for the offerings and whatnot. I'm not going to claim to know the purpose of all this stuff that was built, but again, this was for the temple, so it was, I mean, it's pretty safe to assume, I would say, that either it's meant to have some sort of, you know, just visual, symbolic meaning to, you know, remind people of God's deeds, or that it was meant for use by the priests, or both, in a way. So, verse 48. Solomon also made all the furnishings of the temple of the Lord: the gold altar, the gold table for the bread of the presence, the lampstands of solid gold, 5 on the south and 5 on the north, in front of the most holy place. Flower decorations, lamps, and tongs, all of gold. Small bowls, lamp snuffers, bowls, ladles, and incense burners, all of solid gold. The doors for the entrances to the most holy place and the main room of the temple with their fronts overlaid with gold. So King Solomon finished all his work on the temple of the Lord. Then he brought all the gifts his father David had dedicated, the silver, the gold, and the various articles, and he stored them in the treasuries of the Lord's temple. Alright, so in these verses here, it's talking about other tools for the temple, other implements, probably other things that the priests would commonly use throughout their ceremonies. And a lot of it's made of gold. More gold coming into play, good grief. The value of all that. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's all, like, gone now. Or at least buried somewhere that we haven't found yet. But, I don't know. There's a lot of valuable items, a lot of intricate details with the things that Solomon built, or had built, by other people. And then he adds in the other stuff that David had dedicated. So, anyway, there's more details about the temple, some of the things that were in it, Solomon's palace, and the, like, construction design of that. And that's what we get with 1 Kings chapter 7. Alright, so, despite the fact that it took almost twice as long to build Solomon's temple, or Solomon's palace, sorry, as it did to build the temple for God, I'm noticing it goes into a lot more detail about the intricacies of the temple. Like, the scripture itself focuses more on the temple, because it's more important to the identity of Israel, who they are, who they worship, and what they're all about. So, I mean, unless we're going to get more details on the palace later, Scripture's seeming to put a lot more emphasis on the temple, as it should. But anyway, it's not sure what, if any, more building stuff is going to be mentioned here, but we'll see what happens next chapter. As always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos as I post them. Look down in the description for links to social media pages, as well as Discord server and supporter page. And down below that, leave comments with any thoughts you have, or questions, or whatever. That's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. Whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.